words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom. They've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case against the singer, David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did this.
Here's a complete recap of the shocking preliminary hearing before the once rising star David heads to trial.
Blood seeping through the garage floor of a Hollywood Hills mansion. That is detail number 4. And if you think you've already heard the worst of this case, you haven't. Today we are walking through the 17 most horrifying details revealed at the preliminary hearing for the singer known as D4vd. David Anthony Burke. He is charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The 5-day hearing gave us a front-row seat to evidence that is, frankly, difficult to sit with. And I need to warn you that some of what we discuss may be unsettling. But these 17 details are exactly what the jury will be asked to weigh. And several of them answer questions that, until now, were buried in sealed filings. Let's start at the beginning. Detail 1: the body itself. On September 8, 2025, a Tesla sat abandoned on a quiet street in the Hollywood Hills for weeks until it was towed. Workers at the tow yard noticed a foul odor and opened the front trunk. Inside, wrapped in plastic and hidden by multiple air fresheners, they found heavily decomposed and dismembered remains. The medical examiner later confirmed it was Celeste, and that she had been cut into multiple pieces. The sheer effort to conceal what was inside that trunk. That is detail 1, and it tells you this was not a moment of panic. This was methodical.
For weeks, the Tesla had been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And we'll get into their alleged relationship shortly, because a lot came out at the prelim, but let's finish the timeline first.
Detail 2: what was missing. When law enforcement searched the home David was renting, they noticed 3 chainsaws had been purchased. According to receipts, only 2 were recovered on the property, and both tested negative for blood. A third chainsaw has never been located. The prosecution suggested it could be the tool used to dismember Celeste. The defense pointed out there is no direct proof linking any chainsaw to the crime. But I was hoping you could file that away a missing tool. Right when investigators believe a dismemberment occurred, ask yourself how that third chainsaw vanishes unless someone wanted it to. Detail 3 brings us inside the garage. Crime scene analysts testified that they found evidence of blood that had leaked from the Tesla, seeped through heavy rubber floor mats, and stained the brick flooring beneath. That pattern indicates that whatever happened to Celeste, her body was placed in that front trunk quickly enough, and with enough fluid, that it pooled and dripped down. One investigator described it as a clear indication that the car was the primary location of concealment very shortly after death. I'll say it plainly. The garage floor tells a story the defendant never intended anyone to read.
The court heard harrowing testimony about the recovery of her remains in the Tesla.
We haven't heard about this detail before. According to this testimony from one of those 2 LAPD criminalists, there was actually blood identified in the brick flooring underneath where a car would have been parked. And that was underneath black rubber mats that were laid down on the garage floor in David's house. So what they seem to be painting a picture of here is blood leaking out of David's Tesla, seeping through those rubber floor mats.
Now, detail 4 is about what the defense tried to do with the medical evidence. Because of advanced decomposition, the medical examiner could not definitively state what caused the penetrating injuries to Celeste's torso. The defense attorney asked point blank, Could these wounds have been self-inflicted?
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent...
Could Celeste have taken her own life? The examiner conceded that some possibilities could not be absolutely ruled out. But here is what that question ignores. And this is a comment, bait moment if I've ever heard one. If Celeste had harmed herself, who dismembered her afterward and hid the body? Who sent the text, which I'll get to in a moment, that looked like a cover-up? The defense planted a seed, but the logic collapses under its own weight. If you caught that contradiction before I even said it, you were already ahead of the cross-examination. Let's move to the digital trail, detail 5. Cell tower data and Tesla's own telemetry showed that in the early hours after prosecutors say Celeste was killed, David's phone and his car traveled together from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then 95 miles north to Santa Barbara County.
And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County.
That same area is where Celeste's passport card and personal items were later found, discarded near Lake Cachuma. The defense countered that just because the car and phone moved doesn't prove David was behind the wheel.
And the defense says, okay, David's car and iPhone were making that trip. Sure, but we can't prove it was David himself in the car with that phone.
We haven't seen any definitive proof yet that links David to the actual murder. We haven't seen any video that actually shows him committing that alleged act. We haven't heard from any witnesses who say they watched it happen. That is missing. We don't know what else they may present.
But the timeline is brutal for that argument. Within 20 minutes of the Uber driver dropping Celeste off at David's home, a text was sent from David's phone to Celeste's asking, "Where you at?" That fabricated concern, detail 6, is what prosecutors call the alibi text. 20 minutes. Even if someone wanted to argue self-defense, who composes a fake worried message to a person they just killed, before even calling for help, in under half an hour? That gap, those 20 minutes, may be the hardest fact for the defense to explain away.
Unless there's an eyewitness or surveillance footage, right, the defense is going to say, how can you know exactly what happened in that house, right? Maybe it was manslaughter, maybe it was self-defense. The problem is, if the prosecution can establish she arrived at this property at a certain time, and then 20 or so minutes later, David allegedly sends her a text, "Where are you?" The alibi text, right?
Yeah.
That would be a really fast time for someone to formulate that if this was purely a self-defense case. Oh my gosh.
Detail 7 takes us deeper into what was happening on that phone before the murder. The courtroom saw exchanges between David and Celeste from early 2024. At that time, she was 13, he was an adult. In their messages, he repeatedly urged her to pack her bags, to be ready for what he called Operation Awesome, a plan for her to run away from her family's home. He told her the day she left would be the most important day of her life, apart from their wedding. Now, some might hear that and think devotion, but listen to the context. This child was being groomed, isolated, and he was the one accelerating the timeline. These messages shift the image of David from a passive participant to the architect.
Where we saw text message conversations today in court showing that David and Celeste were talking about something called OA, Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can't immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important day of her life, aside from their anticipated wedding. Again, at this time, she is only 13 years old.
That becomes even more relevant when you reach detail 8, the abortion. Medical records and text messages discussed in court indicate that Celeste underwent an abortion in January 2024, when she was only 13. The procedure was arranged, according to messages, with David's knowledge and involvement. This is not just about a relationship. This forms part of the charge of continuous sexual abuse of a minor. And in California, consent is irrelevant. The law is clear that an adult engaging in sexual acts with a child of that age is a strict liability crime.
And this came out as well. We have previously heard references to abortion and the Plan B morning after pill in their text message exchanges. But today we actually saw messages discussing an abortion appointment for Celeste in January of 2024. Now, do the math there. Her birthday was September of 2010. She was 13 when this purported abortion took place.
The defense cannot argue she lied about her age to escape that charge. That fact alone likely guarantees a conviction on the abuse count, and yet the full context is even more disturbing. While Celeste was recovering, David was allegedly planning to relocate her permanently to his home. Now let's talk about motive, detail 9. The prosecution introduced texts where Celeste, jealous of David's rumored closeness to an influencer named Asia Collins, threatened to expose the illegal relationship.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship, or perhaps early stages of dating, that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites.
She wrote that she would call his mother, his business associates, and ruin his career. Celeste's words were a direct threat to a man whose gross earnings between 2023 and 2025 were estimated at $10 to $11.5 million. According to testimony from a financial witness, she could dismantle everything he had built. The special circumstance of murder for financial gain is on the table precisely because of that financial exposure. If verified, David didn't just allegedly kill to silence a victim. He killed to protect a multi-million-dollar future.
And a lot of the questioning there, a lot of the cross-examination from both prosecutors and defense attorneys had to do with management of David's finances. Who is paying the bills, who is reviewing expenses, and just how much money was involved in this operation around this budding artist with what's been described as a multi-million-dollar music career ahead of him. Well, let me give you the numbers this witness laid out. He says between 2023 and the end of 2025, David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million.
If you need a moment, I understand. But detail 10 is the one that made the courtroom go silent. During the autopsy testimony, photos were shown of Celeste's remains inside the Tesla's front trunk. A reporter present described seasoned journalists freezing, hands pausing over keyboards, as the images appeared, and directly ahead of them sat Celeste's parents. Her mother, seen bowing her head and weeping. The human cost landed in that room like a physical blow. No amount of legal maneuvering can undo that image, and I suspect the jury will carry it into deliberations.
Today, for the first time, we actually, in the courtroom, saw photos of that portion of the investigation. We actually saw the victim's remains in cadaver bags, still in the front trunk of that Tesla. It was something I don't think I have the words to describe. Reporters sitting in the courtroom actually stopped typing for a moment. There was a second where it felt like everybody just froze. And there was this too. For the first time today, we actually saw the parents of the victim, the mother and father of Celeste. They were both sitting in the courtroom. They were sitting directly in front of me. They were about 3 rows ahead of me. And I could see the victim's mother, Mercedes.
Detail 11: the air fresheners. Multiple air fresheners were found inside the front trunk, placed directly with the remains. Investigators documented them as part of the effort to mask the odor of decomposition. What makes that so chilling is the calmness it suggests. Stopping to add fragrance, as if the smell were a minor inconvenience rather than evidence of a horrific act. Someone who can do that is not panicked. They are calculating.
Efforts. I mean, somebody must have noticed, oh, it smells terrible. We got to do something to cover that up. So somebody actually opened up the front trunk, reportedly with the remains inside, and then put air fresheners in there to try and mask the smell. Multiple air fresheners. And all of that was, of course, documented and then taken into evidence.
Detail 12 is the demeanor in court. Over 5 days, observers noted that David sat largely still, emotionless, staring straight ahead except for one moment.
But before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure.
When explicit images from his phone were described, showing him and a young Celeste engaged in sexual acts, he began to fidget. His leg bounced. He seemed to shrink in his seat.
A little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
I am not a forensic psychologist, but I'll note that the only time he lost composure was not when the dismemberment photos were discussed. It was when his own self-image took a hit. That tells you something about what he values. Detail 13 is the chainsaw testimony again, but from a different angle. An LAPD criminalist testified that they did not conduct touch DNA testing on the 2 chainsaws found at the home. The defense hammered that omission, implying that a proper test might have shown someone else's involvement. But the criminalist stood firm, explaining that the decision was standard given the condition of the tools and the lack of visible blood.
And there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws. So she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers.
Still, the absence of that third chainsaw hangs over everything. Where is it? If the defense truly believed the evidence was planted or contaminated, they'd want that third chainsaw found just as much as the prosecution. The fact that it remains missing is the open loop that won't close.
There's a question about where's that missing chainsaw? They claim that David purchased
Right.
3 chainsaws.
Three.
2 of them that were found at the property tested negative for blood. Can you make the argument that the third one is what was used to dismember her body? Where is it? Is it in Santa Barbara anywhere? That's something I interviewed Steve Fisher about on Sidebar.
Detail 14, the private investigator who was kicked out of court. A key witness for the prosecution, a PI hired by the property owner, allegedly violated grand jury secrecy, and the prosecutor had him excluded.
On day 3, there was some drama in the courtroom, specifically about a witness who was no longer allowed to be called.
Now, according to the prosecutor in this case, the deputy DA, Beth Silverman, apparently Steve Fisher violated grand jury secrecy. And because of that, she made a request this morning for him to be excluded from the witness list. He was in the courtroom. He was sitting right by me. He stood up, acknowledged that request. There wasn't any kind of pushback. There was no argument there. And he walked out.
He had collected neighborhood surveillance, digital evidence, and more. The drama in the hallway between the DA and the victim's family attorney over this man is its own subplot. But the takeaway is that significant portions of evidence may not have been revealed in the hearing. The judge ruled that enough probable cause existed to send the case to trial, but the DA's office has since said publicly that they presented only a fraction of what they have. So ask yourself, what could be more damning than what we've already heard, and why are they saving it? That question will keep me up at night. Detail 15 is the Uber ride. David called a car for Celeste from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, 80 miles south, to his door. The driver could not say with certainty exactly where he dropped her off, but he confirmed he picked up a young girl, matching her description. That ride is the last independent sighting of Celeste alive.
Prosecutors allege David killed Celeste on April 23, 2025. They say David called her an Uber to pick her up from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, California, and then drive her about 80 miles south to his home in the Hollywood Hills, where he allegedly murdered her.
Within the same hour, she was dead. The gap between drop-off and the alibi text is vanishingly small. If the defense wants to argue someone else did this, that unknown person would have had to be inside David's home, with access to his phone, at exactly that moment. That strains belief past its breaking point. Detail 16 brings us to the passport card. It was recovered off a state road in Santa Barbara County, in the direction David's car and phone traveled. Why would Celeste's passport be there, unless someone wanted to dispose of her identity along with her body? The passport was a connection to her life, her dreams, and its recovery miles from her home speaks of a deliberate effort to scatter who she was. That small plastic card is heartbreaking in its ordinariness. Finally, Detail 17. Before this hearing, Celeste was largely reduced to case file vocabulary, decedent, remains, victim. But on day 2, the prosecution showed photos where she was alive, a selfie with red hair in the front seat of the Tesla, a ring on her finger, a tattoo of David's name in red ink. That shift, from autopsy subject to girl with dreams, is not just rhetorical. It's the prosecution forcing everyone to see her as a person, someone who liked music, who thought she was in love, who was still a child.
That could be shown to the court. We saw Celeste at age 13 with what appeared to be a diamond engagement ring on her left ring finger. That's the finger that had David's name tattooed on it in red ink. We saw photos of the two of them kissing and cuddling in bed. We saw selfies of the two of them. Celeste with her red hair in the front seat of his Tesla.
I want you to hold on to that red-haired girl, because that's who all of this is about. So now I'm turning it over to you. Which of these 17 details struck you as the most impossible to explain away? And what do you think the prosecution is holding back for trial? I read every comment, and I want to hear your reasoning. If you want to be the first to know when that trial begins, and what evidence emerges, subscribe and tap the bell. I'll be here breaking down every moment the second it happens.